Imagine standing on a hill 70,000 years ago, looking up at the same stars we look at tonight. Down in the valley, there's a creature huddled by a fire. It isn't the strongest animal around. It can't outrun a lion. Its claws are useless. Its teeth are blunt. By every law of nature, it should be somewhere in the middle of the food chain, nervous, hunted, forgettable. And yet that fragile creature is us. And within a blink of evolutionary time, we would go from hiding in the grass to building cities, splitting atoms, and reshaping the entire planet. The question that haunts this whole book is simple and a little unsettling. How did an ordinary, unremarkable ape end up ruling the world? And here's the harder question Harari asks. Now that we have, are we any happier for it? Welcome back to the quiet shelf, where we read great books slowly. Tonight, we're sitting with one of the most talked about books of our century, Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari. A book that tells the story of all of us and quietly asks whether the story we've been telling ourselves is the one we really want. Let's start with something most of us were never taught, and it genuinely changes how you see yourself. For most of our history, we were not the only kind of human on Earth. We tend to picture human evolution as a straight line, an ape slowly standing up, getting smarter until it becomes us, clean, inevitable. But Harari says that picture is wrong. The truth is far stranger.
There were many human species living at the same time. The Neanderthals in Europe, strong and cold adapted, Homo erectus in Asia, who survived for nearly 2 million years, far longer than we have so far. Other humans on distant islands. For a long stretch, our ancestor, Homo sapiens, was just one human species among several, nothing special, one twig on a crowded branch.
And these weren't dumb brutes, by the way. That's the cartoon we were sold, the slouching, grunting caveman. But Neanderthals had brains as large as ours, perhaps larger. They cared for their sick. They buried their dead. They controlled fire and made tools. If you'd visited Earth 100,000 years ago and tried to guess which human species would inherit the planet, you might not have picked us at all. So this is the first humbling idea of the book. We grew up believing we were the chosen pinnacle of life. But for most of the story, we were just one option among many, and not obviously the best one.
And then the others vanished. One by one, every other human species disappeared from the Earth, until only we were left. Why? Nobody knows for certain, but there are two theories, and neither one is comfortable. Maybe we interbred with them, and they slowly blended into us. Or maybe, and this is the darker thought, wherever we went, the others simply stopped existing. Perhaps the very first thing our species did on its way to the top was to quietly remove everyone who looked almost, but not quite, like us.
So if we weren't the strongest or the smartest by much, what made the difference? What turned one ordinary ape into the master of the planet? Harari's answer is the heart of the entire book. Around 70,000 years ago, something shifted inside the sapiens' mind. He calls it the cognitive revolution. Our way of thinking and our way of speaking changed, and suddenly we could do something no other creature on Earth could do. We could tell stories about things that don't physically exist, and we could get thousands of strangers to believe the same story at the same time.
Think about it. Other animals can communicate. A monkey can scream, "Careful, lion!" and the others run. That's real. That's useful. But only humans can say, "The lion is the spirit guardian of our tribe, and if we honor it, it will protect us." There is no lion spirit. You can't touch it, photograph it, or prove it. And yet, because everyone in the tribe believes it, it shapes how they live, who they trust, and what they're willing to die for. Harari points out that this is the real superpower.
Ants cooperate, but only with close family, by instinct. Wolves cooperate, but only in small packs that know each other. But humans? Humans can cooperate in groups of millions with total strangers we will never meet, as long as we all believe in the same invisible story.
And here's a detail Harari draws out that I love. Before we could tell grand myths, he says, we first learned to gossip. It sounds almost insulting that the foundation of civilization is gossip, but think about what gossip really is. It's information about who you can trust, who keeps their word, who cheated, who helped. In a world of strangers, knowing who is reliable is everything, and language let us track the reputations of far more people than any other animal could. From small talk about each other, we slowly graduated to bigger stories, about gods, about ancestors, about what our tribe stands for. The myths grew out of the gossip.
That's the secret. Not strength, not even raw intelligence. Shared imagination. The ability to weave a fiction so powerful that millions of people will organize their whole lives around it. That is how an ordinary ape conquered the world, not with claws, but with stories.
Now here's where it gets uncomfortable, because Harari turns this lens on the things we treat as most real. He says that so much of what runs our world is, in his words, a shared fiction. Not a lie, something subtler, something that exists only because we all agree to believe in it together. Take money. A banknote is just paper, or these days just numbers glowing on a screen. It has almost no value in itself. You can't eat it, can't wear it, can't shelter under it, and yet we'll spend the best hours of our lives chasing it. Why?
Because everyone agrees it's worth something.
Money, Harari says, is the most universal and most successful story humans have ever told. The one trust system that a Christian, a Muslim, an atheist, and an enemy will all believe in equally. And it's the same with nations. A country is, in a sense, a story we agree on. A flag, a border drawn on a map, a name. You can't point to France in nature. You can fly over the land and never see the line. But that shared story is powerful enough that people will cross oceans for it and lay down their lives for it. Harari uses an example that really stuck with me, the limited company. Take any giant corporation you can think of. Where is it, really?
Not the buildings. Those could burn down and the company would survive. Not the employees. They could all quit and be replaced. Not even the founder. He could walk away tomorrow. The company itself is a story, recognized by law, that we all agree to treat as if it were a real person that can own things, owe money, and sign contracts. Harari calls these legal fictions, and our entire economy is built on them. Trillions of dollars move around the world every day in service of entities that exist nowhere except in our shared imagination.
And the same with corporations, with religions, with laws, with human rights. None of these things exist as physical objects you can hold. They exist because we tell ourselves they do, together, generation after generation. And here is the twist that stops you in your tracks. Harari isn't saying these stories are worthless. He's saying the opposite. These shared fictions are exactly what let millions of strangers live side by side without tearing each other apart. They are the invisible threads holding civilization together. The danger isn't that we believe in stories. The danger is forgetting that they are stories and letting them rule us as if they were unchangeable laws of nature.
Now we come to the chapter that honestly changed the way I see everyday life, and it's the most provocative claim in the whole book. Around 12,000 years ago, humans did something that looks like our greatest triumph. We stopped wandering and hunting, and we settled down to farm. We learned to grow wheat, to raise animals, to store food. Every textbook calls this the great leap forward of civilization, but Harari calls it, and I'm quoting him, history's biggest fraud.
Here's his argument, and it's a strange, brilliant one. He says, don't ask whether farming was good for our species as a whole. Ask whether it was good for the individual human being who actually lived it. And the answer, he says, is no. The hunter-gatherer had a varied diet, worked fewer hours, and moved freely. The early farmer, he bent over the same field from sunrise to sunset. He ate a poorer, narrower diet. His back ached, his joints wore down, and new diseases spread through crowded settlements. By almost every measure of a single life, the farmer was worse off than the hunter who came before.
And then Harari flips the whole thing on its head with one unforgettable line. He asks, did we domesticate wheat, or did wheat domesticate us? Think about it from the plant's point of view. 10,000 years ago, wheat was just a wild grass in one corner of the world. Today, it covers the planet. We clear forests for it, we carry water to it, we protect it from pests, we bend our spines to serve it. From wheat's perspective, it didn't get enslaved by us. It tricked us into spreading it everywhere and devoting our lives to its survival.
And here's why this matters for you and me tonight. Harari says we keep making the same trade over and over. We adopt something that promises an easier life, and we end up with a harder one. The luxury quietly becomes a necessity and then a new burden. Think of the smartphone. It was supposed to save us time. Instead, many of us now feel we can never switch off, answering messages at midnight, working from the dinner table, never fully free. We invented the tool to serve us, and somewhere along the way, we started serving the tool. That, Harari says, is the agricultural revolution happening again right now in your pocket.
And there's a deeper point hiding underneath all of this, one that lands hard if you sit with it. Harari says evolution doesn't care about your happiness. It only cares about one thing: copies, the number of strands of DNA that get passed on. By that brutal measure, wheat and cattle and chickens are among the most successful species on Earth because there are billions of them. But the individual cow in a factory farm or the individual farmer breaking his body in the field, their suffering doesn't show up anywhere in that scoreboard. And that's the quiet warning for us, too. We measure success by numbers that have nothing to do with how a life actually feels from the inside. The bigger salary, the larger house, the busier calendar. We can be a roaring success by every external count and still be exhausted and hollow underneath. The scoreboard was never designed to measure your contentment. It was only ever counting.
Once humans started living in large groups, a new problem appeared. How do you keep millions of strangers in order? And the answer, Harari says, was hierarchy. And the way we justify it is unsettling. Every large society in history has divided people into ranks: free people and slaves, nobles and commoners, one race above another, men above women, one caste above the next. And here's the part we don't like to admit. Every one of these hierarchies claimed to be natural, ordained by the gods or written into biology. But Harari says almost all of them are pure invention. There is no natural law that makes one skin color superior or one bloodline royal. We made it up, and then we forgot we made it up. The cruelest part is how these stories sustain themselves. He calls it a vicious cycle. Imagine a group is told generation after generation that they are lesser. They're denied education, denied opportunity, denied wealth. And then, when they end up poor and powerless, society points and says, "See?
They really are inferior." The prophecy creates the very reality it claimed to merely describe. Harari gives the example of how, across almost every culture in history, men were placed above women, and every society explained it as simply natural, just the way things must be. But if it were truly written into nature, why would the rules be so different from one culture to the next?
Why would the things considered manly in one place be considered womanly in another? The very inconsistency, he argues, gives the game away. These weren't laws of biology, they were stories, powerful, deeply held, but stories all the same.
And this is why these things are so hard to undo. The injustice doesn't feel like a story we chose. It feels like the natural order of the world. It takes enormous courage across generations for people to stand up and say the words that change everything. This was never natural. We invented it. And what we invented, we can also unmake.
And I find something strangely hopeful in that. If our hierarchies were carved into nature, we'd be stuck with them forever. But because they're stories, they can be rewritten. Almost every step of moral progress in human history, the end of slavery, the vote, equal rights, began with someone refusing to accept that's just how it is and daring to tell a better story instead.
About 500 years ago, something changed again, and it launched humanity forward faster than anything before it: the scientific revolution. But the thing Harari points to isn't simply that we got cleverer. He says the real heart of science was something stranger and braver: the willingness to admit that we don't know. It sounds odd, but think about it. For most of history, people believed that everything worth knowing was already written down. In scripture, in the wisdom of the ancients, the job of a thinker was just to study and obey. The answers existed. You simply had to find them in the old books. But the new scientists dared to say two of the most powerful words ever spoken: we don't know. And the moment we admitted there was a vast ocean of things we hadn't discovered yet, we set out to explore, to test, to measure, and a flood of new knowledge came rushing in. And Harari describes the most powerful alliance of the modern age: the handshake between science, empire, and capitalism. The scientist wanted to know. The empire wanted new lands. And the investor wanted profit. The three of them fed each other. Ships sailed out to discover the world, carrying scientists, carrying money, and carrying guns. There's one idea here I find genuinely fascinating. Harari says modern progress runs on a quiet engine we rarely talk about: belief in the future. We call it credit. In the old world, people assumed the pie was a fixed size. If you got more, someone else got less, so the economy couldn't really grow. But once humans started to believe that tomorrow would be richer than today, bankers dared to lend, and investors dared to invest, because they trusted that the future would pay them back. That faith in endless growth is what made the world develop at breathtaking speed. But it's also one more story we should hold carefully. Because can a planet with limited resources really keep growing forever? That question is still hanging over us tonight. There's something else here that Harari makes you notice: how recent all of this really is. We talk about human history as if it stretches across endless ages, but the entire scientific and industrial world you live in is only a few centuries old. Your great-great-grandparents, just a handful of generations back, lived in a world with no electricity, no antibiotics, no flight. The phone in your hand would have looked like sorcery to almost every human who ever lived. We are not living at the calm end of a long, slow climb. We are living in the middle of an explosion, and we're so used to it that we forget how strange and sudden it is. And the progress we're so proud of always came with a shadow: colonization, oppression, and the destruction of countless other cultures. Part of the wealth and knowledge that made the modern world shine was built on the suffering of people whose faces we never saw. Progress is rarely just progress. it is almost always progress for some, paid for by others. And an honest history has to hold both of those truths at the same time. And now we arrive at the question I think is the most important in the whole book, the question that makes Sapiens different from any ordinary history. Harari asks, across these 70,000 years, we gained almost unimaginable power. We went from a frightened ape to the ruler of the planet. But did we become any happier along the way? It's a question we almost never ask because the answer feels obvious. Surely our lives are better than our ancestors. We have medicine, electricity, food in abundance, comforts that ancient kings could only dream of. And yet, Harari says there is no clear evidence that we are any happier than the hunter-gatherers of 20,000 years ago. Because happiness, it turns out, doesn't depend on external conditions as much as we think. It depends on expectations and on comparison. People long ago had little, but they also expected little. And they lived inside tight, woven communities of people who truly knew them. We today have 100 times more, and we expect 100 times more, comparing ourselves to the whole world through a glowing screen. And many of us feel profoundly alone in a crowd of millions. Harari talks about a fascinating body of research on happiness. He says our sense of well-being seems to be set around a fixed point. When something wonderful happens, a promotion, a windfall, a wedding, our happiness spikes for a little while, and then quietly drifts back to where it started. And when something terrible happens, illness, loss, heartbreak, we sink for a time, and then slowly adapt and return to that same baseline again. Which means the external things we believe will make us permanently happy, a bigger house, a newer car, a higher salary, give us only a temporary lift. Then we get used to them and start reaching for the next thing. This is exactly why chasing more and more never seems to deliver lasting happiness. We adapt to everything we acquire faster than we ever expect. So Harari points to something quieter as the real source of contentment. Not external conditions, but good relationships, a sense of meaning, and peace of mind. And intriguingly, those may be things that ancient people in small communities had more of than we do. And there's one more angle Harari explores that I find genuinely deep. He borrows from Buddhist thought. The idea that the root of suffering isn't whether we have little or much, but the restless craving of the mind itself. As long as the mind keeps grasping for pleasant feelings and pushing away unpleasant ones, it can never be at peace. Because the instant we get what we wanted, the mind leaps straight to wanting the next thing. It's a race with no finish line. And maybe that's why. The more the world advances, the more anxious people seem to become. Because we've grown brilliant at acquiring things to fill our lives, and we've never learned the harder art of feeling that we have enough. When I read that, I had to stop and look at my own life. How for years I kept reaching for one more thing to add, when maybe what I really needed wasn't more at all. It was less. This is the most painful contradiction in the whole book. We may be the most powerful creatures that ever lived, and also among the most dissatisfied. So let's turn this lens on our own lives, because it's closer than you think. Every morning, we wake and go to work for numbers in a bank account. We're serving the story of money that humans invented. There's nothing wrong with that. But if we can see it clearly, we can ask ourselves, are we chasing the numbers so hard that we forget what they were meant to buy us in the first place? Time and peace. Do we measure our own worth by a hierarchy that society made up? Job titles, salaries, follower counts. These are rulers that humans built, not laws of nature. We don't have to let them define how much we're worth. And do we ever stop to ask, in all this chasing of progress, more money, more things, becoming more impressive, are we actually getting happier? Or just feeding an expectation that never ends? If there's one lesson I'd love you to carry home from this book, it's this. So much of what looks like unchangeable reality around us is really just a story written by human hands. And the moment we see that, we get to choose. We choose which stories to live by, and we refuse to let the wrong ones quietly steal the happiness out of our lives. But should I believe every word of Sapiens without question? I don't think so. As someone who reads a lot, I think this book has places where we should be careful. First, Harari tells the story of our entire species in a single volume. To do that, he has to generalize and simplify enormously. Many historians push back, saying that some of his claims sound sharp and convincing, but are really sweeping a little too broadly, or picking only the evidence that fits the story he wants to tell. Second, the claims that agriculture was a fraud and ancient people were happier are hotly debated. We have no real way of knowing how happy someone was 20,000 years ago. The hunting life was also full of violence, starvation, and children dying young. Sometimes romanticizing the past is just one more story we need to be careful with. And third, the book is brilliant at tearing down our beliefs, at showing us that everything is invented, but it rarely tells us what we should build in their place. Knowing that money, nations, and religion are stories can leave some people feeling empty, like nothing means anything. So I'd use this book as a tool to see the world more clearly, but don't let it carry you into cynicism, into believing nothing matters. Because even if a story is something we made, it can still be a story that gives our lives real meaning. And one last thing I want to note. Harari tends to view humanity rather darkly. He often paints Sapiens as a kind of ecological serial killer, destroying wherever it goes. And there's truth in that. We've driven countless species extinct. We've devastated nature on a massive scale. But at the same time, we are the only creature that knows how to feel regret for what it has done. The only one that tries to protect other species, that makes art, that searches for meaning, that sacrifices for total strangers. I think the honest picture of a human being isn't just destroyer, and it isn't just crown of evolution. It's both, mixed together. A creature with a frightening darkness and a beautiful light living in the very same heart. And every single day, we get to choose which one we feed. At the end of the book, Harari brings us right up to the present and looks ahead. And he leaves us with an image I can't shake. He says we have become like gods. We can engineer life, rewrite our own genes, build minds out of silicon, perhaps even cure death itself. The frightened ape from the valley now holds the power that we once gave only to the heavens. And yet, Harari ends with a warning, not a celebration. Because for all this power, we still don't seem to know what we actually want. We can do almost anything, and we're not sure what any of it is for. He leaves us with one quiet, piercing line. We are gods who do not know what we wish to become. And that's a sobering place to end 70,000 years of history, isn't it? We spent all that time gaining power over fire, over animals, over the land, over the very code of life. And we never spent the same effort learning what the power was for. We became extraordinary at the question how.
how to build, how to grow, how to conquer, and we stayed strangely silent on the question, why? Why any of it? What kind of life, what kind of world all this power is meant to serve? The danger of becoming a god, Harari is gently telling us, is doing enormous things without ever stopping to ask whether they're the right things. And that warning isn't only about our species as a whole. It's about each of our lives, too. Each of us holds more power than any human in history. More knowledge, more choices, more freedom than our great-grandparents could have imagined. The real question isn't whether we have power. We do. The question is whether we're using it to build a life that's truly meaningful to us, or just a louder, busier, fuller version of the same restless chase. So, tonight, before the next story pulls you back in, maybe sit with this one for a moment. Of all the stories humanity has ever written, the most important one is still the quiet one you're writing with your own life. Make sure it's a story you actually want to be living. Thank you for spending this time with me on the quiet shelf. If this gave you something to think about, stay a while. There are more good books waiting to be read slowly. Until next time, take care of yourself and take care of your story.